Hello, welcome to Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared, the podcast everyone needs to hear but nobody wants to hear. I am Angela Hamblin Kelly, the administrator of the Baptist Centers for Good Grief, and I'm joined here today with two of my incredible colleagues to talk about coping skills and journaling.
I'm Kevin Lee, President and CEO of Mid-America Transplant, and we are honored to sponsor this episode of Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared. At Mid-America Transplant, we have the privilege of working with families across southern Missouri and northeast Arkansas who make the heroic decision to donate their loved ones' organs or tissues. While donation often brings families comfort, they are still heartbroken by their loss. We are driven by compassion for these families and continue to walk with them through their grief journey. Mid-America Transplant provides several programs to help families memorialize their loved one, but we believe that some of the best support can be provided by a grief center. We are proud to work with the Center for Good Grief and appreciate everything they are doing in the region to bring healing to people who are coping with loss. Mid-America Transplant is inspired by life and by the donor families who give transplant patients a second chance at life. For more information about being a donor, visit sayyesgivelife.org.
Before we jump in, let's talk about grief for just a second. We know that grief is the most universal experience there is. Again, this is the podcast everyone needs to hear because grief involves pain and vulnerability, which is also why this is the podcast nobody wants to hear. So let's get to journaling, and let's get to my two guests who are here, two of our fabulous grief counselors, Rachel and Maria. Hello, and welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So in today's episode, we're going to talk about journaling and how this can be a really helpful tool when we're grieving. And I know there's people out there that are probably already thinking, I hate journaling, I'm not good at journaling. Hang in there with us because it really can be a helpful tool. I am not a big journaler. It's not something I do every day, but it has really helped me in my own grief. So we're going to talk about just some particular features of journaling and how journaling can be helpful, the rules of journaling. Guess what? There are no rules. And then we're going to really get into some actual examples and types of grieving that can really be helpful when you're grieving, so that when you're finished with this episode, you should really be able to walk away with some ideas and examples that can help you really start journaling immediately. So that's our hope today. So let's just jump in and let's just say, what is journaling? Let's just put it out there.
Yes, so journaling is putting our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences into some sort of recorded form. Now, when we think of journaling, we usually think of having some sort of written record or a place where we can write to process our thoughts, but it doesn't necessarily need to be just writing. It can be something that you use via a voice memo as well, or it can even be something that you do through art. It doesn't necessarily need to be the written word, but generally the primary purpose is really just for that personal benefit of self-exploration as well as self-expression.
So, like I said, there's some people who are already like, nope, I don't like journaling. Journaling's not for me. And we said, hang in there with us. So let's talk about the benefits of journaling. Why can journaling help us as grievers?
I think journaling can help us as grievers because research has shown that journaling can promote physical and mental health as well as reduce stress. When I think about what Dr. Nicole explained about writing, she said it so beautifully. She said self-witnessing is an act of observing ourselves. So when we journal, it is a way that we can self-observe and also promote our self-awareness about what is going on to really connect with our inner selves.
Great. So it can promote calmness. I know when we're grieving, a lot of times we need that calmness or opportunity to help us with calmness. It's also an opportunity to help us maybe consider different perspectives, to kind of get outside of our head for a minute and have a opportunity to put things down on paper and maybe see something from a different perspective. So benefits of journaling for grieving people It's a way of intentionally dosing. So if you listen to our podcast, we say this all the time. We talk a lot about dosing. So journaling is a way of intentionally dosing yourself with your grief, and it creates an opportunity for mourning and grief expression. And another benefit that I really love is it's basically available all the time. You can do this anytime. Like Maria, you said, I love how you brought the voice part in there. It can be voice notes. It doesn't have to be, something that we sit down in the most perfect journal and have the most perfect time of day where nobody's bothering us. I mean, it really can be available in so many different ways anytime. And we're going to get to some of those examples.
Yes, definitely. And really, at the end of the day, what's so important is that it's really a vehicle that allows us to gain that perspective and that deeper understanding and a little bit of clarity on our grief experience, those thoughts and feelings that we feel, so that they don't feel necessarily as chaotic or outside of our control. And that's usually the main thing that people think of when they think of journaling. But there's also deeper purpose that we can have, and because it can also be used as a form of memorialization, which is the things that we do to remember and honor and connect with our loved ones. So when we're journaling, it can be a connection point to your loved one who has died, and an opportunity to spend some time with our memories that we have, both the positive and the negative. There is benefit there.
Absolutely. And one of the things I love about journaling is just the safety it provides. It's a safe place. When you're grieving, oftentimes nothing feels safe. Everything feels disordered, out of control. You didn't ask for this. And so I really like the safety that journaling can bring. It's a place where you can put your thoughts and feelings, and you're not getting judgment back from other people. You're not getting advice back from other people. It really is your place to help as you're trying to weed through your grief, maybe looking for a sense of purpose, or it helps with balance or feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, I love that you talked about how it creates a sense of safety, because we need to instill hope. And I think establishing that sense of safety helps us identify sources of hope through journaling and the different parts of journaling that we can access. So, when we are journaling, witnessing ourselves, this allows us to kind of go back to review where we have been and where we are now and where we are going. It also can be encouraging to track our grief process and to see how far that we have come. And so when I have witnessed and support some of my companions, they talked about and kind of reviewed like where they've been over the course of treatment when we worked together, and just to see where they are now. It's like, oh my God, I didn't know that part of my journey was just so hard, so devastating. I didn't see any way out. I didn't see the light. And just to see, through my progress over time, I can just see the benefit on how journaling has helped.
Rachel, I love that you said that about tracking, how people are able to kind of track their progress, because oftentimes when we're grieving, we feel stuck. We feel sometimes, especially, with the holidays, we can feel like we're going backwards in our grief, when in fact, we know grief is like the waves. That's how we talk about grief being like the waves, and how they come in with different levels of intensity. And so it can be helpful sometimes to go back and look at different types of journaling to see, oh, I actually am making progress. It's just that my grief is like these waves. It looks different on different days and different levels of intensity. So I like that. So I've said this a couple of times since we've started, is that not everybody likes to journal. I was one of those people. So let's talk about why people don't journal. Like, what are the things that keep people from trying this?
Right. And I think the number one thing that keeps people from journaling is the same thing that keeps a lot of us from doing lots of things that would be beneficial for us in our grief and in our life, which is just time, finding the time to do so, which is valid because in our lives, we already have a lot on our plate. There's only so many hours in the day, and how much more limited is our bandwidth when we're grieving. So it can feel really intimidating to put aside this time and make space for it. So it's really important to intentionally create this time, not only to journal, but also for our grief in general. It doesn't have to be a lengthy endeavor. It can be as short as just one sentence. And I have talked to my own clients about that, how you can just pick it up. You can write down just the words of how you're feeling for today. It doesn't even need to make grammatical sense. That's not what's important. It is just about that good expression and that record of where you are right now for that reflection that Rachel was talking about later. So, and it's also something you don't need to do every day. It doesn't need to be every day at 7 a.m. I'm going to journal for 30 minutes. Not at all. You can set a timer for a minute or two and just write until that timer goes off. And that's enough. So often people think of journaling as this huge task where we have to write several pages. And that's really great. That's wonderful. There's so much benefit to that. But it really doesn't have to be that way to be something good for you and your grief.
I really like the setting the timer. I talk about that with a lot of people who maybe just will say, well, I don't have time to do that. And say, you've got 2 minutes, literally set the timer for 2 minutes and just free write. And I've never had someone tell me that was a bad idea. They wish they had not done that. They actually will say that it's even amazing in that 2 minutes, the relief that they felt, just having a place to put those thoughts. And I just think that's just something that was surprising to me. And it seems very surprising to our clients as well.
Definitely.
I know also journaling can just feel overwhelming. And again, I think personally, that's where I always had a hard time with it. Was like, well, I don't even know where to start. Like, there's just so much. And probably my type of brain, I want it to be correct. I want it to be right. I want to get an A on this assignment. And we have to think about this. This is not an assignment. It's not about being right. But that was so hard for me. It's like, well, where in the world am I going to start? And so, again, we're going to talk about some actual types of journaling here in a little bit. But one thing is there are journals out there that have prompts and that have, the thoughts already there. You just have to, finish the sentence. And I know that was helpful for me for a while before I could really get started was, oh, well, I can answer these questions, and for those of us that are trying to do it right or, feel like we want an A, that can sometimes give us a little bit of structure to give us the confidence, right? Because some of us don't have the confidence with this, especially it can feel overwhelming. Our grief feels overwhelming. Where do I start? I want to, pay really good honor to my loved one. And so it can just be overwhelming of where to start.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Some people that I have worked with in the past said, Rachel, journaling feels like a dissertation. It is not a dissertation.
Right.
It is not a dissertation. And some people describe it to me as it feels like a chore. It's like I already have to do the laundry. I already have to get the kids fed. The dog needs me to. And I just don't want to do it. It makes me feel so uncomfortable. And I love that Maria touched on how it can just be one word. And so listening and being a witness to their stories and the themes that's kind of circulating throughout our process of working together, I'll help by pulling one word. What do you think about this word? Ooh, I like this. Well, let's go look at some other words that can kind of resonate with you. And so one person said, dread exhausted. I said, I like that. I really like that. I like that a lot. And so we kind of just really dive into what that means to them and what that looks like. And going back to what you said, the 2-minute timer. I remember there was one, did not want to write at all. And I said, well, let's set a goal for 2 minutes. And it turned into 20 minutes of writing. How powerful was that? And how it was so much benefit in that session where they needed that. And they felt so much relief in that session. So that is something that I wanted to add and share. Mm-hmm. That we want to remove any preconceived notions and to get rid of any rules that we think that needs to be applied to journaling.
Yes, exactly. And I just am thinking about all of that, just coming back around to the fact that we already have lots of chores on our plates. You're right. We got to go to the grocery store. We got to feed the dog. We got to drop off the kids. And just like I said before, we know grief already saps out all that energy and we have limited resources. So that's why there's such a benefit in giving us time to engage in those shorter writings for a minute or two. But just like Rachel said, if those 2 minutes turns into 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, that's wonderful as well. And it seems so paradoxical, but so many people that we work with find that activities such as journaling ultimately help to restore their energy and give them a little bit more rejuvenation after already feeling so low and so energyless in their grief. So just like we've been talking about, sometimes the hardest part is just getting started. So finding that starting point that works for you, sometimes that's all that you need, just finding that diving board so that you can get on in there and swim.
Maria, that's a great point. That's a great point that you mentioned. Just that starting point, just diving in there. Sometimes we don't have to have a direction. Sometimes the direction is good. And another thing that I hear that is just not my thing. It's not my thing. And there's some things I like to remind our companions that we do serve here that, hey, there are great benefits of trying something new. Trying something new, like swimming. May not be common for others, but that is trying something new. And when you get into the waters and you find your rhythm, it's like, this feels good. I can do this. And I can't wait till we dive into more practical things of what we can do and what that looks like for, each individual.
Right. And along that line, sometimes people will say, I'm not a good writer. And I'll say, well, that's great. Because like you said, Rachel, we're not writing a dissertation. You're not writing a book. This is not going to get a grade. You don't have to show it to anyone. You don't have to bring it back in here in session and show to me. You can write it and you can run it through your shredder after you write it. You don't have to keep it. You're not turning it in for grade. This is something I've really had to tell myself is grammar and spelling, it doesn't count. So stop worrying, stop bringing that perfectionistic part of you to the table. You do not have to worry about those. You can journal, just in thoughts. It doesn't have to be a complete sentence. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're not turning it into your high school English teacher. You don't have to worry about that grade. This is really just a tool to help get the things that are inside of you out. It's just a place for them to go, and you certainly don't have to share them with anyone. Can it be helpful to share things with people? Yes. And we'll have some actual activities later that you might want to share with people, but also you don't have to. To go back, Maria, I really like that you mentioned the one word. I had a client who just would struggle just with breathing. She would do the rapid breathing. And so she would just write breathe on a sticky note and put it on her computer at work, or she would put it on her bedside table at night. And so sometimes it can just be, even on this little sticky note, just this one word that's helping you, maintain just a level of functioning, but also coping with your grief.
Definitely. We just have so many preconceived notions around what writing looks like. And I feel like one of those preconceived notions is that this has to be something that's for other people. Right? When we're writing, it's typically, like you said, something for school or just something that involves another party. But at the end of the day, when you're journaling, especially journaling in your grief, it doesn't have to be for anyone but you if you don't want it to. And when I'm working with various people, they talk about how they're concerned about privacy, about, I'm being vulnerable. I'm putting all of these different thoughts and feelings from deep down in my soul, from a very intimate place, out onto this piece of paper. And I just want to reiterate again, you don't have to share it with anyone if you don't want to. Sometimes just the act of putting our feelings and our thoughts into writings, just putting them down at all, can make us feel so vulnerable. But that's why I want to talk briefly just about numerous ways that you can keep those writings safe and private. Like Angela said, if you want, you can destroy them. We were talking before about how it can be beneficial to keep a record if you would like, so that you can reflect back on your progress. But the primary benefit of journaling at the end of the day is the process itself, not the end result, right? Going back to that, I'm writing, it needs to be a dissertation. It needs to be something I turn in and make it perfect. That's not what this is. This is about the process and the feeling and the expression of it. So at the end of the day, if it's going to be destroyed or shredded, or put in a lockbox or put away, if you put it in your phone with a passcode so that no one else can get to it, all of those are perfectly fine. Anything that you can do to help you feel safe while you're doing this hard work.
I love that. That is a need that does come up, where I've had people talk about, the privacy of their journals where someone had read them without their permission. And so what Maria said was great. You can do journaling on your phone and you can lock it with a safe passcode, or you can destroy it immediately. And one of the things that I always remind my people that has those concerns, but that just going back to how do I start, Rachel? I hear all this great information, but how do I start? One of the things that I just remind them is no rules. This should be liberating. There are no rules. Remember, writing, your body is already experiencing so much because grief is a whole body experience. And so journaling is just a way that we can contain that information safely. And so we're taking what's inside of our bodies, outside of our bodies in a contained place where it's safe. And so there are no rules. This is liberating. Because I know we live in a world full of rules. And again, when we're writing, we're putting it somewhere safe, whether we're destroying it, it is safely placed somewhere else where we can give our bodies that relief. And so I think that is the message that we must continue to spread out. Remember, journaling, whatever form or expression that we use, whether it's creative, whether we do it in nature or however we use it, it is a containment to kind of pull what's in out. And I think that's what we need to continue to share that message.
Definitely, we need to have a safe place to journal, right? And I think part of building that safety is also giving ourselves psychological safety around journaling, because so often it becomes another chore, as we've talked about. It becomes another thing that we're putting on our plate that we have to do. And so often I hear people use language of, I have to journal. Oh, I really should journal today, Maria. I know I need to journal. People keep telling me I need to journal. And when we use that sort of language in our own head, it makes it feel a little bit less safe and a little bit more difficult. So something that can be so helpful when positioning ourselves to engage with this wonderful tool of journaling can be reframing some of those thoughts to something a little bit softer and something not as rigid. Instead of it being, oh, I have to journal, maybe it's, I get to journal. I have the time to journal today. Maybe I can do that for 5 minutes. I'm able to journal. I'm just going to try this journaling thing out. When we use this language, this softer language, it just helps us to be a little bit softer towards ourselves and not have those hard expectations. Like Rachel said, there's no rules. There's no right or wrong way to do this. We just want to do this in a way that is helpful and safe.
And just to remember that journaling is not always on paper. You know, there's audio and video journaling that we can do as well. And there's great benefits in doing those. I do encourage families sometimes with young children that audio and video journaling can be very helpful to capture stories and memories from other generations where they can hear just all the different things and they can see, you know, maybe their loved ones who are telling these stories, or they can, you know, feel the emotion as they're telling the stories. And then sometimes people are just more comfortable doing audio journaling and then they choose to maybe transcribe those. So there's other ways than just getting out a pen and putting it down on paper.
Definitely. There are so many benefits to using an audio format or a video format to journal. And first and foremost, it can sometimes just be easier and faster than putting a pen to paper. And sometimes it's more accessible. A pen and paper are not always available, but we all usually have our phones right there with us. And there's a microphone in there as well as a camera in there. So sometimes that feels just a little bit easier and a little bit more immediate. Also, you can move around and do things when you're engaging in an audio-video form of journaling, such as recording while you're taking a walk, or even recording while you're maybe doing some of those other chores that you do have to do. You don't have to sit down and focus fully on it like you do when you write with a pen to paper. Something else that comes to mind when I'm thinking of this is that it can just capture so much more emotion, right? When we're reading words on a page, you can't always read the tone. the inflections of a voice, the micro expressions, the cadence, all of these things that can come through when we hear someone's voice or when we see someone's face. It also just allows us to think out loud, where we were talking a little bit about how it's hard when we're putting a pen to paper to be able to step back and not allow ourselves to just nitpick over grammar or spelling or things like that. When we are talking, we can just talk and we can just think out loud and just get out whatever we need to get out. Also, when we're going back, if you decide to keep these recordings, because like we said before, if you want to get this out and delete it, by all means, do what you need to do. But if you decide to keep these recordings, you get to experience yourself in a brand new way when you go back and listen again. And it might take some getting used to hear the sound of your voice. I think we've all had that experience of hearing our voice on an answering machine or on a recording and having that moment of feeling a little jarred. But once you take that moment to get used to that, it gets a little bit easier of a time to experience ourselves in this new way. It also allows us to maybe even approach ourselves with a little bit more compassion, viewing ourselves from this outside perspective and allowing ourselves to get to know ourselves a little better in a way that we might not be able to when we're reading our words on a page, when we are confronting ourselves, our own image, our own voice. And there's also the flexibility when we're recording of playing with the perspective. You can talk in the first person, which is when we speak with from the I point of view, I think, I feel. But you also can experiment with a second or third person perspective, where maybe you're talking to the second person, you, who will be either you yourself, who is listening and watching in the future, or to someone else, if you do feel comfortable having someone else to listen to this and reflect with you in the future. There's a lot of flexibility that we can have when we are doing this via audio or video that we just don't have when we are writing with a pen and paper.
Absolutely. Those are all really great. Thank you. And we're going to get to some actual examples, but before we do that, let's just go back and review just a couple of things, whether you're journaling with a pen and paper, markers and paper, or if you're doing audio or video, just a couple of things that we've talked about here. And especially if you're just starting out, just start simple. Keep your entries short. Don't think about, I've got to write 20 pages or that dissertation Rachel mentioned. I mean, just start simple, short. Set that timer, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Just write a word, one sentence. So when we start simple and we achieve it, then it's going to help us feel more confident to do it again. So just remember when you're starting out, especially when you're grieving, and if you're fresher in your grief, that simpleness is going to help you. It's the dosing that we talk about. Strive for some balance when you're journaling. So what does that mean? Don't just journal about the most difficult times. Sometimes, especially when we're grieving, we just feel maybe pulled to that. And that can be helpful then. It can help take some of the pain off. But think about those other times too. If you are having a day when you're feeling okay, well, maybe pause then and sort of check in with yourself. Like, okay, I'm feeling okay today. What does okay mean? What does okay look like? If there's a moment in nature that you felt a connection or some joy or gratitude, try to pause in those moments too. So think about that balance. I know that was something for me when I started journaling with grief. I was like, well, I'm just supposed to really journal in these painful times. But actually, that balance really helped me see, like Rachel and Maria have talked about, some of that progress in the grieving. We've talked about rereading it so that you can see that progress if that's helpful. You can share it with a trusted person if you would like. You also don't have to. So remember that. And so remember that there are no rules. Throw that type A part of you out and just go with the thoughts that you're having, the feelings that you're having right then. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about spelling. This is not getting a grade. So those are some things to really keep in mind when you get started with journaling. All right, well then let's jump in. Let's talk about clustering. What in the world is clustering?
I love this exercise, and I find it very popular when I'm working with my people because it's not overwhelming. It's like I just pick one word and put it in the middle of the page. Yes, that's it. And so as I talked about earlier, I try to listen to some themes of what's happening, and we will pick out words, or I will bring a list of words, and whatever word resonates with them in that moment and where they are in their journey, I tell them, put that word in the middle of the paper. This word is your focus word. This is where you focus on this word in the middle of the paper, and around that word, I want them to write as many words as they can think that comes to mind with the focus word in the middle. So this word could be grief, and so around grief could be heavy, lonely, connection, supported. And so as they're writing all the different words that's around the word in the middle, they will also take a moment, sit back and reflect. What's popping out for them? What are some things that they're seeing through this exercise? And then I will have them to go back and to write more words that's associated with the words that they had already revealed during this exercise. And I see great benefit where people say, okay, I like this better, versus you giving me a prompt and I have to write for 2 minutes. I like this better. That way I can just shoot out all the words because that's how I feel that it's kind of going inside of my head nonstop. And this is just an exercise where I can pause the brakes, become still, and contain it into a place where I can have some type of control. Because sometimes when it's inside my body, it's just running rampant. And this was a great exercise for them to do. And I love it. By the way, being a griever myself, this is something that I gravitate towards too, because I write so much throughout the day and I need something so simple. But this is a great way to use clustering as a tool to help you kind of navigate what's kind of going inside of your head, what's going inside of your heart, what's going rampant inside of your body, and just having a place to contain that. And to witness yourself, and to witness what you're experiencing, and to give it voice, and to tell your story through this creative exercise. Also, I tell people, get creative. We can use markers, we can use colored pencils, or we can find objects in nature that we can place it in different places of the board or the paper. Whereas, sometimes I have people go on a scavenger hunt, because I do most of my work virtually. And so they will get big rocks or different objects in nature to kind of describe what these feelings represent. Sometimes if we don't have access, sometimes people don't want to go in nature. Okay, so whatever word that you do, put in the center of the paper and the words associated around it, I tell them, I want you to show me the impact this word has on you. So for example, if it's heavy, they will take heavy and stretch it across the paper as big, just to show me the intensity of that word and what their body is carrying. One word could be lighter, where it's very small. They're able to manage it. And so as we sit back and we take a step back and we kind of do an overview, looking overhead, what's going on, now we can pick and pull out, what do we want to work on first? What are some needs that we need right now in this moment? Do we need breathing? Do we need more relaxation? Do we need just silence? Do you need me just to hold space? So I love this activity.
I love clustering. I think we all are big fans of that. And I love, Rachel, that you use the example of putting grief in the middle, because sometimes people can think, well, how am I supposed to journal about grief? I hate grief. And that's a way right there, is putting grief in the middle of that page, like literally putting the word, and then putting all the other words that come to mind when you think of that word. So that's a great example of clustering. I'm just curious, what are other ideas from both of you about the words that could go in the middle of the page for clustering?
I had one experience. I have many experiences where people have put exhaustion. They're really tired, very fatigued, neglect, hope, really hope, and what that looks like. And some examples that they put, it could be a butterfly flew across their face, right? That facilitated hope for them to kind of borrow from that moment. What else? Rest. What does that look like as a new griever, right? So many things that you can put in the center of that paper. Or identity. What is that? What does that look like now? Where am I going? Who am I?
Definitely. And I've seen, that's what I was actually just thinking about, is that I've seen people put I was.
Oh, yeah.
And just start to branch off of that and cluster off of that and reflect on all of the ways that, things about themselves that maybe aren't the same anymore after their loved one passed. And now being able to put in I am to process some of those identity changes that Rachel was talking about. And it doesn't only necessarily need to be about processing those big, heavy thoughts and feelings. It can be a way to remember our loved ones. I've seen people put their loved one's name in the center of a page and then just branch off, whether it's memories they have about them or different personality traits of their loved ones. Clustering can be used in so many different ways to be able to process our grief and to remain connected to those who have died.
Yeah, we could go on and on for clustering. I think it's one of my favorites, and I love doing it myself. I love doing it with other people because that word association is just so helpful, and it gives people sometimes a roadmap. Like, I had no idea that this was even in my heart or in my head, and so clustering, we encourage you all to try that. So going from something like clustering, there's another way of journaling, which is simply making lists. I don't know about you all out there, but I am a list maker. I have a to-do list every single day. And so that's kind of what we mean. But also especially when we're just starting our grief journey and everything is overwhelming and our thoughts are running a mile a minute and we don't even know what we have. Sometimes there is an advantage to sort of journaling in a list format. Like, these are maybe some things I don't want to forget, but I can't journal about them now. I've had clients tell me that, like, I don't want to forget, the sequence of events that happened at the end of his life, but I can't go there now, but I want to put them down on paper to remember, or I want to remember when we met and these things, and just sort of journal as a list. And that's, again, where we've talked about the benefit of being able to go back to journaling. That may be something a few years down the road you can go back to and be like, oh, yes, let me go into more detail now with this. So list making can be a helpful tool as well.
Definitely. Lists also, they can give us some structure when things feel so unstructured in our grief, and give us just that little bit of extra control when we are just trying to wrap our minds around everything that's going on and be able to contain our experience, like Rachel was talking about. And I can't help but think of, just like we talked about how clustering can be used to remember, so can lists. You can jot down signs or reminders of your loved one as you experience them so that you can go back and look at them and, glean some comfort and some remembrance from that as well.
I love that. That's a great point, Maria. Another one that comes to mind, and it's not a dissertation. Remember, dissertation takes years. But this one that I really love is the 5-minute sprint. It is where you set a timer and you write as quickly as you can about your grief for 5 minutes. Sometimes you can do this by yourself, or even if you're a support person or your counselor, they can do the 5-minute timer for you. And so when you finish, you reread what you wrote, and even if you're in mid-sentence, don't have a panic attack about it. It's like, I didn't finish. It's okay. We're going to stop right here, and then we're going to take some time to step back and hold space and reread. And one thing that I like to sit with my clients is, like, what do you notice? And I notice I need. And so many needs are being revealed through this exercise. I need patience. I need self-compassion. I need to slow down, right? That is so powerful. And so when we discover that, what are some ways that we can dose in slowing down? What are some ways that we can dose in practicing patience to ourselves? What are some ways that we can practice self-compassion as we would do a friend? And so this is just a beautiful exercise, and it's only 5 minutes. And as I mentioned before, you could do the 2-minute exercise that can turn into 20 minutes. And so easy to do, but it's so powerful. It's a powerful exercise on how they can discover what's happening in that moment, what do they need right now, and other ways on how, as the holder, how can I help them? How can we help each other? What is the plan moving forward?
I love that. And that, that just goes so well for people just to be able, especially when they're feeling stressed or feeling a lot of anxiety. Sometimes people won't, it's not a natural thought to like, oh, let me go journal. But that 5-minute sprint can help, especially because you're writing as fast as you can. And it can feel like you're getting that stress or that anxiety to really go from your body through that pen to the paper. So it's such a helpful tool. And well, I'll tell y'all one of my other favorites. It's what we call capture a moment. And I absolutely love doing this with people. So capturing a moment is about writing about a favorite moment in time that you experienced with your loved one. And when you capture the moment, you really want to think from a place of your senses. You want to think about what you saw in that moment in time, what you heard, what you felt, what you smelled and tasted. So we really want to engage our senses. We want to go to a particular memory, and we want to capture that moment in time on paper. And so again, it's almost like you're writing a painting, right? So you're writing it, but you're capturing all the things from your senses, what you saw, what you heard, touched, smelled, and tasted. And I love doing this with people. Some examples that I've done with clients is when they first met. So if it's someone whose spouse has died, we might travel back to that moment in time when they met. And when you're a grieving spouse, you're sometimes just so focused on what you're missing right now and the loneliness. And so it can be such a joy to go back in time and to tell that story of when you met. And so there's just so many different moments in time that you can do. Sometimes when I'm with a client and they're really talking about a particular moment that's so special to them, we might pause right there and capture it on that paper. Because again, when we capture it from the place of our senses, it opens so much more up inside of them. Things that just maybe don't typically come to mind, things that maybe the people out in the world don't really want to take the time to hear, but we want to take that time. We want to process it. And it's such a way to spend time with your memories. It's also such an important way of recording them so that you can go back to them and reread and revisit and almost just like revisiting that very, very special moment that you had. And so that's one of my favorite things to do with people. I've done it myself, and I just think it's such a beautiful way to capture those precious, precious moments.
Definitely. That reminds me of another writing exercise that I have found helpful personally, and also that I have used with a lot of people at the center that I have worked with, and it is called 6-word stories. Now, a 6-word story is where you take an idea, you take a person, you take a feeling, you can take anything that you want, and you make a 6-word story out of it. You reduce everything down to just 6 words, and you do everything you can to make sure that every word that you choose has meaning, is very intentional. So this is different, the other side sort of, than that free write that we were talking about, where we are able to just be that fountain that is pouring out everything that we need to pour out. With the 6-word story, we take a little bit more intentionality to focus in and make every word count. Some of you may have heard of 6-word stories before. There's a legend that the famous author Ernest Hemingway once made a bet with some of his writer friends that he could write a story, a full story, with only 6 words. And the result at the end of the day was a really poignant story, a really sad story of for sale baby shoes, never worn. Those 6 words speak volumes. You don't need many words to tell the depth of your story. There's still a lot of doubts regarding the accuracy of that story about where it came from, but this is just a tried and true writing exercise, and just has been something that I've seen people find so much, not only expression from this, but also it has also acted as a diving board into deeper conversations about their loved ones, about what their loved ones meant to them, about just the depth of their own experience in their grief. This is a tool that looks so simple on the surface, but just can contain multitudes, for lack of a better idea or term.
I love 6-word stories. We just recently, as a team, engaged in an activity where we did 6-word stories as grief counselors, and they were all so unique and individualized, but they were also powerful as well.
Yes.
And so, even though it's only 6 words, that does not take anything away from the power. So like what Rachel, you've said, it's doesn't have to be pages and pages for it to be meaningful. Those 6-word stories can be quite a beautiful challenge.
Definitely, and so profound.
Yes, absolutely. Let's talk about letter writing, because a lot of people will be told when they're grieving, you need to write them a letter. You need to write them a letter and say goodbye. Well, that is not what we are talking about with letter writing. That is not some little task that you should do when you're grieving and check the box and you'll feel better. But there are so many different types of letter writing that can be helpful to you when you're grieving. It can be helpful to write to your loved one daily if that's what you feel, or as much as you feel like you need to. It can help with that connection and allows you to still feel that their presence, especially if this was a person who was in your daily life and that you did talk to daily and communicate with. It can be hard to all of a sudden, wait, I'm not supposed to do that. So journaling can be a way that you can continue to feel connected to that person. Letter writing can also provide an opportunity if there was unfinished business, things that you want to say or things that you want to talk about with that person. Again, this isn't being said to do this as a way of a final act and, there you go, I'm done with that. But it can give you a place to say these things. We know that many of us have unfinished business when our loved ones die, and it gives us a place to put that, a place that we can come back and visit that. Maybe we add to it. Maybe we talk about it with our support person. And that way it's not just, as Rachel said, running around inside our bodies, creating terror for us. It gives us a place to put that. Some people will write kind of a series of letters. Again, we were talking about like tracking that progress. So you can kind of, see where you were, where you are today, and even write about your hope for your future. Writing to yourself can be helpful when you're grieving, because we're a new, different, ever-changing person. We didn't ask to be this person. We don't want to be this person, but we are, and we're working towards this new self-identity. Well, that is a really hard task of mourning to do that. And so journaling can be a really helpful tool in that exploration of who am I becoming? And, Maria, you even gave that beautiful example with clustering. You could do that as a way of clustering, or you could do it as letter writing. You can also write a letter to someone else, maybe someone who hasn't really been there for you in your grief the way you thought, or maybe someone who has said something hurtful to you in your grief. Letter writing can be a helpful tool to cope with that. Doesn't mean you have to give it to them. Doesn't mean you have to put it in the mail. In fact, we would encourage you to sit on that for a minute, but it can be so helpful to get it out and not let it consume your thoughts and take away from your grief and all of those things. It can be helpful to do that. Sometimes we don't have a person that is causing us maybe chaos in our grief. Maybe we don't know if our loved one died in an accident, or if it was a homicide or a drug overdose. Maybe there was somebody else that was involved in the death of that loved one. You can write to that person, even if you don't know them, and write to them about the pain that they've caused you, and gives you a place to put those thoughts and to put those feelings. And then you can destroy it. I've had people run it through paper shredders. I've had people take those types of letters maybe out to their fire pit, but because it's about the expression, it's about letting that feeling and that emotion and that just pain inside of your body, giving it a place to go temporarily and allowing you a way of expression. So what are other thoughts do you all have on letter writing and how you've seen that to be helpful for people?
So helpful. Where, as you talked about the series of letter writing, some people just think, if I write this letter, I'm done.
Right.
No, you can have an open letter. And just for them to be able to go back and share, and to go back to whether it's communicating with their loved one or communicating with the person that was involved in their loved one's death. This is a place where they can always go back to voice their concerns. And I've seen great benefit where this was much better versus traditional talk therapy. Mm-hmm. This was so beneficial for several of my people that I was privileged to hold space with, that the letter writing was just so profound. And it evoked so many different emotions during this experience of holding space with them. And they just really talked about great benefit, and they were able to not only use this tool as it relates to their grief, but to go back into other places of their lives that needs healing, whether it's in childhood experiences where they had to do letter writing with their parents. This is a universal tool that you can use in any area of your life. So it's very beneficial for them. Another tool that I really, really like is just free writing. Mm-hmm. Parents that I have worked with that have lost their children really gravitate toward this exercise where you can incorporate pictures or different artwork and use different art mediums, and also do collages. They really, really love this exercise where, again, sometimes other people may need assistance on, I just don't know how to free write, Rachel. And so just sitting and holding space for them for probably 30 minutes within that session, we talk about, hey, as you were talking, this theme that is just reoccurring, let's talk about this. And so, for an example, man, I miss the noise. That was a place for them. They miss the noise of their little one just running around and the environment very chaotic. But that was that space for them to go back to include those pictures and talk about different memories, talk about different experiences of what they shared and how they used to complain and how they just miss the noise now. So profound when they allow themselves to tap into this exercise. I want to go back to talk about just capturing the moment. Mm-hmm. Something I always remember how it can, when you tap into your senses. I remember one person telling me lavender. They just kept repeatedly saying this word. I was like, take me back to that experience when you're just saying lavender. And so they went to the garden and how their toddler would just uproot all the different lavender plants that they planted. And it was a lot of tears in that session, but a lot of laughter, right? They were able to go back to those early life experiences, and they needed to just hold space for that moment. It's just all of these different tips and exercises that we're sharing, they're so powerful and profound. But to go back to incorporate pictures of art and collage, I think that is a beautiful way and just another form of expression, because we can tap into that creative side. Even if you're not creative, I always tell people to go to my favorite, which is a mandala. Mm-hmm. You can do so much with mandalas, whether you're using different art mediums or using nature objects that you can, the circle kind of represents the total sense of self, and you will go and pull different things that kind of symbolize what is kind of, what's happening inside your heart in your world, and you're putting it on this paper. And then I will instruct them, now go free write what's happening inside this mandala. What story might you tell me? And so I've seen how beneficial that has been for other people doing free writing and incorporating art in different forms of expression, and even poems. Mm-hmm. getting poems and lyrics from music and different lyrics, but we would go back and review what lyric kind of resonated with you, and so we will read that out loud in session or even play it, and then they will begin to write to add on to what their experiences are. So I think it's a beautiful way to tap into, and it also gives your heart the words that it needs to speak. And so I think, it's beautiful once you dive into it. Just dive into it. Even if there's resistance, that is where you need to dive in and to just give it a try.
Rachel, you've got me just like my brain on fire for a second. You've just made me think of several things I have to share. So one, I love the incorporation of the art because we're talking about journaling this whole episode. And so we're obviously saying, oh, there's words, right? There's words running around and I'll have all these words. But sometimes there are no words. Sometimes, and that's what we talked about, why some people don't journal, was where do I start? I don't know. I don't even have the words. There are no words to describe how I'm feeling. And so I love that you brought that full circle here, is that's where collage can come into play. So maybe you don't have the words, but you can get a magazine and dig through a magazine and you can find words or images and you can build your journaling. So even when you don't have the words, there is a way to do journaling, and I love that. And I love that you brought up music and poems because I've had clients sometimes before, some of the teenagers that I've worked with, here's a song that really speaks to me. Well, which lyric is it? And then, okay, if that's the lyric, if you were writing the next verse, we take some creative license here. If you were writing the next verse, what would that be? And just how powerful that is, because it's like, well, this is what I heard in the lyric and this is how it spoke to me. And then this is where I would take it. It's just such powerful ways to do that. And then I was just thinking too, like listening to you, right? Like I said, you got me on fire. Just even some of the letter writing, I wanted to go back and mention that I've had people write letters to alcohol. Like obviously we're not giving this, but to write in such powerful letters how you ruined our family, how you ruined my future. And so sometimes that letter writing, it's like I was mentioning, it's not always to a specific person maybe it's to a thing or an object, or maybe it's a person, but I don't know who you are, that kind of a thing. And there can be such power in that as well. And so, I don't know, just listening to you, Rachel, you just made me think about all those other ways. And I think that's what we're saying in this whole episode is there's just so many ways to do this if we can just get past the barriers that are holding us back. But I had to share those because you got me all excited, Rachel. So what else? I know there's still a couple of other types of ways to journal we need to talk about.
Definitely. And one thing that I've just been reflecting on as I've been listening to you ladies talk about all of this is that there's just such a broad spectrum between this could be as structured as you want it to be, and this can be as unstructured as you want it to be. Yes. It can involve words. It can involve pictures. It can involve colors. It can involve anything that you want to involve. And something that I was reflecting back on, just thinking about letter writing in particular, to go back to more of that traditional usage of journaling, I have had so many clients who will, quote unquote, send their letters to their loved ones in different ways, whether that is waterlogging them or bringing them to the fireplace and burning them to send them out into the spiritual ether. There can be something very powerful about writing even a traditional letter to your loved one and sending it to them to be able to have that connection. Something else that I was thinking about as we've been talking about writing poems that Rachel had brought up, and thinking about a structured way to do that is making something called an alpha poem. I know that this is something that sometimes is called an acrostic when we're growing up in school, which is basically where you take a word, or you can take your loved one's name, and you write the letters vertically down a page. And then for each one of those letters, you assign a different word. And you can take this to wherever you want. We've got this structure to start you with, but it can become anything you want it to be. You can take your loved one's name and write down all of the wonderful characteristics about them. Or you can write about things that involve the unfinished business that you have. have. You can take these tools and you can use them however you want. And even when it comes to writing a poem, you can write a traditional poem. It can rhyme. It doesn't have to rhyme. You can take a haiku, which is, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Take that structure and run with it. Like we were saying earlier, there are no hard and fast rules. We want you to take all of this stuff that we've given you and take it and use it in the ways that works for you.
I'm so glad you mentioned alpha poems because I've seen 4-year-olds do alpha poems with our help, but they love their loved ones' names. Or I was thinking about a particular child I work with. We took Dad, and then she loved coming up with the things for the different letters that were about her dad. And we did that around Father's Day. And they actually, we shared that with Mom, and they actually took it to the cemetery, and it became part of the memorialization that they were using. But I just had to say that because we have to remember that children can do these things too. They might need a little bit of our help to do it, but it can be just as powerful for them. And it captures things for them, especially young children. We know we need to help them capture these things so that they don't lose these memories. So alpha poem is a great thing to do with young children as well.
Yeah.
I love that. That's so powerful that we're talking about the littles because they need help too. And one thing that I like to do with the littles, how we always make birthday wishes, blow a wish. One thing I know littles, they love bubbles. And so something that me and the little we created was bubble letters, where inside their mind they will tell me what they will want to say to their loved ones. And so they'll take a deep breath. They will inhale and exhale slowly, and that bubble will travel all the way to their loved one so their loved one can receive that message. And that is a way that they can do it and also promote self-regulation, right?
Right.
So it's so many things that you could do with the littles. But another thing that I wanted to also talk about, how there are just so many great journals out there that you can purchase that are guided journals. Amazon, also just going on YouTube and discovering what are some helpful journals that can provide you those prompts that you need. And there are also free guides out there that you can have access to kind of get you started in thinking about what direction you want to go.
Wow, that is a lot. Listeners, we hope this episode has helped you think differently about the benefits of journaling while grieving and maybe given you some activities that you'll try. So we say all the time that we just have to try things. It may not be the thing that has helped us before. We know grief has totally changed us and reshaped us, and it may be time for you to try some other things. I know for me personally, it was not anything I wanted to do. It wasn't my thing, but it actually has really helped me cope with my grief. So I would encourage you to try. And listeners, if you want a little bit more, we do have a coping skills toolbox. It's our coping skills toolbox number 3. And it focuses on journaling as well. And you can find that on our YouTube page, Baptist Centers for Good Grief. You can also find it at our website, baptistgriefcenters.org, under the resource tab. So thank you so much, Rachel and Maria, for being here. It is such an honor to know both of you, and I don't say this lightly. It really is an honor, and just such a privilege to work with both of you and alongside of you and watching you and all the great care you give so many clients. So just thank you both for all that y'all do every single day. So like we say, grief is real, grief is big, and grief is better shared. To our listeners, we hope that you remember that grief does heal. Let me say that again. Grief does heal. But grief demands attention and care. It needs support and patience. It needs to learn new ways of expression, like journaling. Remember that your grief is a reflection of your love. You are not alone. This world is full of many grievers like you. So you can go to our website, baptistgriefcenters.org, to learn more. You can check out our YouTube channel. And remember, grief is real, big, better shared. And we'll talk soon. Now it's time for you to go journal.